Okay, so let's set the scene. Imagine the darkest hour before dawn, the kind of inky blackness that swallows all sound, all reason. Then, out of that suffocating silence, they came, screaming. A primal, guttural roar that tore through the mangrove roots, blades flashing in the faint pre-dawn light. We're talking about 4,000 men, packed shoulder to shoulder, a human tide, utterly convinced that the American lines would simply break under the sheer force of their will. One Marine, a guy who'd seen things no human should ever have to see, later wrote about it, saying, "It sounded like every soul in hell had been cut loose." You know, that's a pretty vivid image, right? By the time the sun finally dared to peek over the horizon, the sand in front of the 105th Infantry was carpeted with bodies, a gruesome tapestry of fallen warriors. And yet, the American line held. It didn't just bend, it stood firm. Now, here's the kicker. The thing that turned that human wave, that terrifying, unstoppable force, into a stalled, bloody meat grinder. What was that weapon? Was it some massive, water-cooled, 30-caliber machine gun spitting out thousands of rounds a minute? Or maybe one of those terrifying flamethrowers, searing everything in its path? Nope. It was something far more unassuming. A 7-shot pistol. A piece of steel that weighed less than a tin of pineapples. The Colt M1911. You see, the Japanese planners, they were meticulous. They had rehearsed every single detail of that Saipan dawn. Every movement, every scream, every blade stroke. But there was one thing they never rehearsed. One scenario they simply couldn't fathom. What happens when a 230-grain slug, moving at the speed of a major league fastball, slams center mass into a charging soldier? It's a pretty fundamental question when you think about it. Today, we're not just looking at a gun. We're digging into exactly why the Imperial Army, and every single banzai charge that followed, grossly underestimated the power of the Colt 45. It's a story about physics, psychology, and the sheer brutal reality of close-quarters combat. To truly understand the impact of the Colt 45, we first have to understand what it was up against. And that, my friends, was banzai. Now, banzai was never just some enthusiastic yell. It wasn't just a battle cry, you know? It was doctrine. It was a deeply ingrained, almost spiritual, military strategy. When Japanese commanders found themselves running low on artillery shells, when their supply lines were cut, when hope itself was dwindling, they often resorted to this. They ordered the bayonet en masse, gambling everything on one terrifying all-out charge. The idea was that the sheer shock of a human wave, screaming, running, blades glinting, would crack the enemy's morale before American fire superiority could even begin to answer. It was a desperate, yet often effective tactic. And here's the thing. It had worked before. Against demoralized Chinese garrisons in 1937, it was devastatingly effective. They simply weren't prepared for that kind of ferocity. It even worked once, briefly, against the British at Singapore, catching them off guard. In the tight, unforgiving kunai grass of Guadalcanal, or the dense, claustrophobic sugarcane fields of Saipan, a determined charge could cover 50 yards in under 10 seconds. Think about that for a moment. 50 yards in 10 seconds. That's faster than the average reaction time of a rifleman fumbling to work the bolt of his rifle. You get one, maybe 2 shots off if you're lucky, before they're on top of you. First-hand diaries from the 4th Infantry Regiment describe it in chilling detail, talking about a tide that surged like water through every gap. Americans, in their own way, had a name for it too. They called it the freight train moment. That instant, that gut-wrenching second, when you realize the line in front of you, your brothers in arms, is about to be physically pushed backward by a mass of human beings who, frankly, stopped fearing death the day they left Yokohama. It wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a psychological weapon designed to break the will of the enemy. and against many, it did. So, you've got this banzai charge bearing down on you. What's in your hands? For many, it was the M1 Garand. And let's be clear, the M1 Garand was brilliant, an absolute game-changer. 8 shots of 30-06, a semi-automatic marvel that redefined infantry combat. But here's the dilemma. At a range where you could literally spit on your enemy, a bayonet fixed to a 5-foot rifle becomes less a weapon of precision and more like a pike in a phone booth. You get 1, maybe 2, 8-round clips off before the sprinting enemy is inside your swing radius, right? Before they're close enough to disembowel you with a bayonet or a sword. That's a terrifying thought. Now, the Thompson submachine gun, that iconic Tommy gun, certainly helped in these close-quarters situations. Its high rate of fire could put a lot of lead downrange quickly. But there were never enough Thompsons. They were heavy, expensive, and not every soldier had one. And then you had the rear echelon guys, the clerks, the stretcher bearers, the kids in the mortar platoons. These were often the soldiers carrying M1903 Springfields, a bolt-action rifle, or, in many cases, nothing but their wits and maybe a shovel. When that banzai wave loomed out of the darkness, when the screams were getting closer and closer, the Army and the Marine Corps desperately needed something else. Something you could draw while your rifle was still slung over your shoulder. Something that spoke a bigger, more decisive language than the relatively anemic 8.02222 Lemimi Nambu round carried by many of the Japanese officers, and that's where the 1911 steps in. This pistol, already 27 years old by the time America entered the war in 1941, was still an absolute beast. It was, without question, the biggest handgun anyone on either side carried in the entire war. It was a statement, a heavy, powerful statement, and its presence, its sheer capability, was about to be put to the ultimate test in the brutal, unforgiving crucible of the Pacific Theater. It was the answer to a very specific, very terrifying problem. You can't talk about the Colt 45 without talking about the genius, the absolute legend, John Moses Browning. The man was a wizard with steel and gunpowder. His designs were so ahead of their time, so fundamentally sound, that they're still in use today. And the 1911? That's a masterpiece. The story goes back to 1904. The U.S. Army was fighting the Moro Rebellion in the southern Philippines. They were encountering these fierce Moro juramentados, warriors who would often drug themselves and wrap their bodies tightly to prevent bleeding out. The Army watched in horror and frustration as these men would absorb multiple 38 straight-long Colt hits that would drop a normal man and just keep coming, hacking away with their blades. It was a nightmare scenario. So, the Army sent out a telegram, a desperate plea that basically summed up the situation. We want a man-stopping round. Yesterday, they needed something that would definitively incapacitate an attacker, something that would drop a man and keep him down, even if he was high on drugs and fueled by fanatical zeal. Browning, being Browning, got to work. He didn't invent something entirely new. He scaled up his already proven autoloader design, a testament to his engineering foresight. He then chambered a cartridge that was frankly fat enough to park a Buick inside. And with that, he gave the world the 45 ACP, a 2.30 grain bullet, leaving the barrel at around 830 feet per second. Crucially, it was subsonic. This isn't just a technical detail, it's a design philosophy. Being subsonic means it doesn't zip through a target like a rifle round, creating a small, neat hole. Oh no! The 45 ACP dumps every single ounce of its kinetic energy into the target, into what we affectionately call the jelly bag of tissue in front of it. It's designed to hit hard and stay there. The pistol itself? It's a marvel of simplicity and robust engineering. Basically, it's a slide-mounted fulcrum. The recoil from the shot feeds the next round. The barrel tilts and locks into place, ready for the next one. There's nothing fancy about it, No overly complex mechanisms to break. Just steel. Overbuilt, solid steel. So overbuilt, in fact, that you could literally drive tent pegs with the frame and still expect it to hit a pie plate at 25 yards. That's the kind of reliability and ruggedness that the military needed. By the time Pearl Harbor was smoking and America was fully plunged into World War II, factories in Hartford, in Springfield, and even a Singer sewing machine plant in Elizabeth, New Jersey were cranking out M1911A1s at a staggering rate of 800 a day. This wasn't just a gun. It was an industrial testament to a brilliant design, ready to meet the brutal demands of war. When you look at the Pacific Theater, you're essentially talking about two primary sidearms meeting in the dark, in the mud, in the desperate chaos of a banzai charge. On one side, you have the Japanese Type 14 Nambu. Let's talk about its specs. 8A 22mm FAMT cartridge, a relatively light 102-grain bullet, moving at about 950 feet per second. Physically, it was skinny as a pencil and long as a dinner fork. Its magazine held 8 rounds. The safety? A tiny scallop on the left side, utterly impossible to manipulate if you were wearing gloves, which, let's be honest, in a jungle environment, wasn't uncommon. And here's a critical point about the Nambu. Officers, not quartermasters, often bought their own. This meant the quality swung wildly, from examples of precision watchmaking, beautifully crafted, to last-ditch, sand-cast junk. Barely functional. It was a gamble. Now, compare that to the Colt M1911. You're looking at a .45 caliber hole in the barrel, a hole big enough you could hide a marble in it. Its magazine held 7 rounds, one less than the Nambu, yes, but every single trigger pull felt like swinging a splitting maul. It was substantial. One Marine, giving an interview to a Stars and Stripes stringer, summed it up perfectly, with that blunt, dark humor you often find in combat veterans. He said, "Hit a man with a Nambu round, and he keeps cataloging his options. Hit him with a .45 and you just erased his to-do list." Think about that for a second. It's not just about the size of the bullet. It's about what that bullet does. It's about immediately taking an enemy out of the fight, about stopping that forward momentum. The Nambu, by comparison, was often seen as more of a ceremonial piece, a symbol of rank, rather than a truly effective combat weapon. And that fundamental difference, that stark contrast in design philosophy and raw stopping power, was about to have profound implications on the battlefields of the Pacific. All right, let's get a little nerdy for 10 seconds, but in a way that actually matters. We've all heard the formula. Kinetic energy equals mass times velocity squared. On paper, this suggests that speed matters more than weight. And for some applications, like punching through armor at long distances, that's absolutely true. But here's the crucial caveat. That's until you're inside a human torso. That's where the physics changes, and the .45 ACP really shines. The .45's 355 foot-pounds of energy might sound humble next to a rifle round, which can generate thousands of foot-pounds. But because the .45 ACP is subsonic, it doesn't just zip through a body, creating a neat, clean hole like a high-velocity rifle round might. Oh no, what it does is far more devastating. It pancakes. It tumbles. It creates a massive, permanent wound channel the size of a golf ball. And the sheer energy it dumps into the target causes significant hydrostatic shock, bruising lung tissue or gut for inches around the actual bullet path. This isn't just about the bullet. It's about the entire system. The Japanese medical diaries, captured on Okinawa, offer a gruesome yet incredibly informative look at this. They speak of the cork-pulled wound, a chilling reference to the way abdominal hits from a .45 displaced organs so violently that nothing could be sewn back together. It wasn't just a hole, it was a catastrophic internal disruption. And here's the tactical implication, the real-world consequence that mattered to a Marine in a foxhole. When 4 or 5 attackers are stacked in a file behind the man you just shot, The first guy folding like a lawn chair trips the next. That immediate, violent incapacitation buys you that critical half-second, that precious moment to work the trigger again. That, my friends, is stopping power as a system, as a tactical advantage, not just a number on a ballistic chart. It's the difference between life and death in a close-quarters nightmare. Let's talk about a specific moment, a pivotal night on Guadalcanal that cemented the 45's reputation. It's 2 a.m., October 25, 1942. Colonel Louis Chesty Puller, a name that echoes through Marine Corps history, has his 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, strung along a ridge. They called it Bloody Ridge, and for good reason. The ridge itself was shaped like a horseshoe, a natural trap. It had been raining for 3 days straight, turning foxholes into muddy bathtubs, turning the jungle into a swamp. Visibility was zero. At 0200, the jungle erupted. It wasn't just a few skirmishers. It was 600 men of the 4th Infantry Regiment, bayonets taped to bamboo poles, coming uphill in a full-blown banzai charge. In the midst of this chaos was Corporal Tony Casamento. His Browning automatic rifle, his bar, was out of ammo. In that desperate split-second decision, he pulls his 1911. He racks the slide once, chambering around. He shoots once, and he watches a shadow, a Japanese soldier, do a somersault backward, crashing into the man behind him. He fires 6 more times, 6 more knockdowns, each one a desperate act of survival. Then, bleeding from 37 stab wounds, he somehow slides into the darkness, surviving to receive the Medal of Honor for his incredible bravery. The ridge, already notorious, was forever renamed Bloody Ridge. And the 1911? It earned its first true jungle fame that night. 7 shots, 7 bodies. The banzai charge, that terrifying human wave, was stalled just long enough for the mortars to dial in, for the machine guns to get back into action. It was a testament to the power of a single man and a single powerful pistol, turning the tide in the darkest of hours. Fast forward to Saipan, July 7, 1944. This isn't just a banzai charge. This is the Banzai Charge, the largest of the entire Pacific War. Over 4,000 Japanese soldiers, a desperate motley crew of walking wounded, men with bandaged heads, rifles with no butt plates, some armed with little more than sharpened sticks, assembled at 0445. Colonel Ichiki, their commander, had a desperate playbook: break the 105th RCT, seize Azlito Airfield, and force the Americans to negotiate. This wasn't just a charge, it was a last-ditch, all-or-nothing gamble. They crashed into lines held by Tennessee National Guardsmen, mixed with seasoned Marines who had never fired a pistol beyond boot camp qualification. In the swirling chaos, Lieutenant William O'Brien found himself in the thick of it. 2 rifles had already been shattered in his hands, testament to the ferocity of the close-quarters fighting. He drew his M1911A1. He fired until the slide locked back on an empty chamber. Reloaded. Repeated. And as he walked forward, firing into the human wave, he was shouting scripture. A man possessed by both faith and a desperate will to survive and protect his men. Eyewitnesses, trying to make sense of the carnage, counted 28 Japanese soldiers dropped inside 20 yards, all by O'Brien and his 45. When his slide finally stopped on an empty chamber for the last time, O'Brien was mortally wounded. But the charge? It had lost its spine. That critical delay, those precious seconds O'Brien bought with his life and his pistol, allowed American machine guns the 30 seconds they needed to unjam belts, traverse their fields of fire, and unleash hell. The largest banzai of the Pacific War dissolved into a massacre, a testament to futile bravery against overwhelming firepower. O'Brien got the Distinguished Service Cross, a posthumous honor for incredible courage. And the 1911? It cemented its reputation. If you can keep your nerve, it will keep you alive. By the spring of 1945, the nature of the war had shifted. The Japanese, having learned the brutal lessons of Saipan and Guadalcanal, largely abandoned mass banzai charges. They adapted. Instead, they began baiting GIs into the mouths of their elaborate interconnected cave systems, tombs carved into the coral of Okinawa. These tunnels zigzagged, twisted, and turned, each bend often guarded by a determined lieutenant with a sword and a Nambu pistol. It was a claustrophobic, terrifying form of warfare, where every shadow could hide an enemy. Private Eugene Sledge, who would later write the seminal memoir With the Old Breed, describes clearing one of these shafts. It's a harrowing account. He recounts, "I fired 2 clips from my carbine, heard the ping-ping of ricochets, then switched to the .45. One round in the torso dropped the officer as if his bones had turned to water." Think about that imagery. Bones turning to water. That's the kind of definitive stopping power we're talking about. The environment of the caves amplified everything. Coral reflects sound, and the report of a .45 inside one of those confined spaces was described as a church bell inside your skull. It was deafening, disorienting. But every Marine interviewed, every single one, agreed on one crucial point. You knew when that .45 spoke. Because the Japanese on the far side of the bend stopped firing, they stopped long enough for you to cross that fatal funnel, to gain the tactical advantage you needed to clear the next section. In cave warfare, the pistol regained its almost medieval purpose. It became the last thing you could hide behind your shield. Or, in this case, your flashlight. When the fight shrank to arm's length, when it became a desperate primal struggle in the dark, all right. So we've talked about stopping power. We've talked about specific battles. But what about the nitty-gritty, the day-to-day reality of a combat weapon? This is where reliability comes in, and the 1911 truly shone. Army historians, meticulously cataloging every detail, logged M1911 malfunctions at an astonishingly low 0.3 per thousand rounds in the Southwest Pacific. To put that in perspective, the M1 carbine, a respected and widely used weapon, had a malfunction rate of 2.8 per thousand. That's nearly 10 times higher. What was the secret? It wasn't magic. It was John Moses Browning's brilliant engineering. Specifically, the feed ramp angle he cut at 31 degrees. It created a channel so generous, so forgiving, that you could literally chamber a round dipped in peanut butter and expect it to feed. Marines still taped the muzzle of their pistols against the rain and the ever-present jungle grime. But even soaked, even caked with mud, the 1911 just cycled. It worked. It always worked. Now let's compare that to the Nambu. This is where the contrast becomes stark. Its extractor claws were prone to shearing under the corrosive effects of the tropical environment. The A2I222 cases, often made with lower-quality brass, would swell and stick in the chamber, leading to frustrating and potentially deadly malfunctions. And the magazines, stamped from mild steel, were so flimsy they would dent if you just breathed on them too hard. A dented magazine, of course, means feeding issues. It's a cascading failure of design and materials. One captured Japanese diary entry, a stark, poignant observation from the other side, reads, "Our pistol is for ceremony. The American pistol is for killing." That single line, written by a Japanese soldier in the midst of the conflict, tells you everything you need to know about the expectations, the realities, and ultimately, who underestimated whom in the brutal crucible of the Pacific War. Beyond the bullets and the steel, there was a profound psychological dimension to this conflict, and the Colt 45 played a critical role. Japanese infantry training, rigorous and often brutal, hammered home a very specific narrative. Americans were soft. They were unwilling to close, dependent on their heavy firepower, their tanks, their artillery. The idea was that a screaming, relentless banzai charge would collapse their morale, shatter their will to fight. And for a time, in certain circumstances, it worked. The sheer terror of a human wave could be utterly demoralizing. But then came the night, or the dawn, or the moment, when the first rank of a banzai charge saw the man beside them not just fall, but lifted off his feet, launched backward by a single shot, a hole in his sternum big enough, as veterans would later describe it, to thumb through. That kind of definitive, violent incapacitation wasn't in the Japanese playbook. Private Shigetoshi Ishii, captured on Guam, provided a chilling insight to interrogators. He said, "We were taught to ignore rifle fire, but the .45 shattered not just bodies but spirit." Think about that distinction. Rifle fire, they were trained to push through. But the .45? That was different. The banzai charge, at its core, relied on crowd psychology. It was a momentum-driven phenomenon. If the front man falls, the second steps over him, maintaining that relentless forward push. But when the front man is launched backward, violently, into the second man, the geometry of the charge breaks. That forward momentum is disrupted. Hesitation, a ripple of doubt and fear, spreads through the ranks. And in that critical moment, that split second of confusion and paralysis, the Americans gained the 5 seconds they needed. 5 seconds to swing a Browning automatic rifle into position, 5 seconds to heave a grenade, 5 seconds to reload and fire again. In that sense, the Colt's greatest kill wasn't just the first soldier shot. It was the morale, the will, the very spirit of the 20 soldiers behind him. It broke the spell of the banzai. Let's talk about some numbers, because sometimes numbers tell the clearest story. Over 1 million M1911 pattern pistols were produced during Guabidiupol. That's a staggering number, representing an immense industrial commitment to arming American forces with this powerful sidearm. Average rounds to stop a charging Japanese soldier with 45 ACP. 1-3. This isn't anecdotal. This comes from meticulous post-action surveys, battlefield reports, and medical evaluations. It means that, on average, it took just over 1 shot to effectively neutralize an enemy combatant. Compare that to the 8-Toy-82 Nambu, 3.7. rounds. That's nearly 3 times as many shots needed to achieve the same effect. In a life-or-death, close-quarters engagement, those extra shots are time. And time in combat is life. Japanese officers authorized to carry pistols, roughly 140,000. They tied. A significant number, to be sure, but largely restricted to officers. American troops authorized to carry a 1911. This is where the numbers really diverge. Every corpsman, every barman, every officer, every tanker, every pilot, every mortar sergeant, nearly 4 million hands, that could reach for a 1911. That's a massive difference in distribution and availability. The arithmetic of underestimation, when you lay it out like this, becomes incredibly simple, doesn't it? The side that needs fewer shots to stop an enemy and has vastly more pistols in the hands of its fighting men is ultimately the side that gets to decide the story told afterward. It's not just about firepower. It's about the strategic distribution of that firepower and the inherent effectiveness of each round fired. After VJ Day, when the guns finally fell silent and the weary troops came home, something remarkable happened with the 1911. These returning vets didn't just bury their pistols in footlockers, tucked away and forgotten. Oh no, they took them deer hunting. They kept them in their nightstands, a reassuring weight in the dark. They taught their sons and daughters to shoot with the very same steel that had saved their lives in a muddy foxhole on some forgotten Pacific island. The mythos, the legend, grew organically from those experiences. You'd hear it in gun shops, around campfires. 1 shot, 1 drop. Stories, some true, some undoubtedly bar stretchers, about severed spines and hearts punched clean out. The 1911 wasn't just a military surplus item. It was a revered tool, a trusted companion. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of post-war sentimentality. When Korea heated up, and then Vietnam, even when the Pentagon, in its infinite wisdom, flirted with the idea of adopting the smaller, faster 9mm round, guess what? The Marines, and crucially, the Special Operations Command, SOCOM, kept circling back. They kept demanding a modernized 1911. Why? Because the story written in jungle mud, etched in the memories of countless soldiers, was clear. When the distance is zero, when you're fighting hand-to-hand, you want the biggest, most authoritative round you can hold in one fist. That reputation, that unwavering trust, began not in some slick marketing campaign, but in the split instant a corporal on Guadalcanal thumbed a magazine into a scorched, mud-caked frame and whispered, "All right, let's see if you work." That's the kind of validation that transcends generations of firearms. Now look, let's keep it honest here. No weapon is perfect, and the 1911, despite its legendary status, certainly had its drawbacks. And it's important to acknowledge them, because understanding limitations is just as crucial as understanding strengths. For one, 7 rounds run dry fast. In a sustained firefight, especially against a human wave, that's not a lot of ammunition. And reloading under nighttime adrenaline, in the chaos of battle, that's a circus act. It requires practice, dexterity, and a lot of luck. It's not like dropping an empty rifle magazine and slamming in a fresh one with a satisfying click. Then there's the weight. The 1911, empty, weighed in at 39 ounces. With a full magazine and the standard 1943 rubberized flap holster, you're looking at closer to 3 pounds hanging on your hip. On a 10-mile march through the jungle, under a blazing sun, you feel every single ounce of that weight. It becomes a burden. And if you didn't grip the pistol firmly, if you limp-wristed it, the slide could short stroke, failing to cycle the next round. This was a known issue, a potential failure immortalized on YouTube decades later, but a very real concern in the heat of battle. But here's the thing about the Pacific Theater. None of those flaws, none of those acknowledged limitations mattered as much as the single, overwhelming virtue of the 1911. If you did your part, if you focused on that front sight, if you pressed that trigger cleanly, someone intent on killing you ceased to be an immediate problem, faster than with any other handheld weapon Americans had. It was a definitive fight-stopping tool, and in those moments, when survival hung in the balance, that was the only thing that truly counted. The drawbacks were simply part of the package, accepted for the unparalleled effectiveness it offered when it mattered most. If stories like this, the kind that peel back the layers of history and show you the brutal, fascinating truths, get your pulse thumping, then do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. Because, trust me, we've got everything from forgotten W-22 rifles to Cold War spy pistols lined up, and you won't want to miss a single one. And hey, comment section. What battle or weapon should we cover next? Your suggestion might just be the next video we produce. We're always looking for those untold stories. So, where does the 1911 stand today? Fast forward to 21st century special operations rooms. You've got operators clearing rooms with short-barreled M4s, equipped with red dot optics, night vision, all the cutting-edge tech. And yet, many of them still sling a .45 class pistol for the tightest corners, for those moments where a rifle is just too cumbersome. This isn't nostalgia. This isn't some romantic attachment to an old design. This is about hard, cold scientific fact. The FBI ballistic tests, conducted with meticulous detail, confirm what Marines intuitively understood back in 1943. Larger diameter, heavier bullets at subsonic speed dump energy faster through flesh than smaller, faster rounds that zip through. It's about creating that immediate, debilitating wound. It's about stopping the threat now. The 1911's century-long service, its enduring relevance, is less about sentimentality and more about engineering truth. It's a testament to the fact that momentum matters when someone's chest is 6 inches away and their intentions are hostile. Every time a modern operator thumbs a 1911 pattern safety, that distinctive click, he's repeating a motion first validated on a ridge called Bloody, in a claustrophobic cave on Okinawa, on a desperate sugar field at Saipan. The lessons learned in those brutal proving grounds are still being applied, still being trusted, by the very best in the world today. That's a legacy that truly speaks volumes. So, let's bring it all back. Did Japanese troops underestimate the power of the Colt 45? I think the answer is clear, isn't it? Just ask the 4,000 who charged on Saipan and left 3,000 dead in the grass, their momentum utterly broken. Ask the tunnel guards on Okinawa who heard that terrifying cave bell boom of a 45 and never fired another Nambu round. Ask the survivors, the ones who lived to tell the tale, and who later wrote, bewildered, that Americans carried a sidearm meant for bears, not men. That's a pretty powerful statement, you know. The answer isn't just in the numbers or the ballistic charts. It's carved into the battlefield headstones from Guadalcanal to the very doorstep of Japan. They underestimated not just the pistol itself, but the fundamental physics of a quarter-inch of lead, moving just slow enough to stay inside a human body and turn determination, that fierce, unyielding determination, into inert, lifeless flesh. The Colt M1911 didn't win the Pacific War. Let's be clear about that. It was a single tool in a massive industrial-scale conflict. But in the critical, desperate moments that decided who held the ridge, who cleared the cave, who secured the airfield, it was the period at the end of the sentence. It was the definitive final word. And the Japanese? They never saw the capital letter coming. Thanks for watching. Seriously, I appreciate you sticking around for this deep dive. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts below in the comments. Would you trust a 100-year-old design, a classic like the 1911, in a modern fight? Or do you think the polymer Wonder 9s have made the venerable 45 obsolete? It's a debate that's been raging for decades, and I'm curious to hear your take. Share this video if you found it interesting, and definitely check out the playlist for more incredible WDIY small arms stories. Stay safe out there, keep history alive, and remember, sometimes the smallest legend punches way, way above its weight.